You are listening to a Galatea audio production of His Kitten, written by Michelle Torlot. Rosie. Chapter 1. Running. I strolled out the main entrance of the school building. It had been another dull day. I hated being here, but my dad insisted. Nothing I could say would persuade him otherwise. Not even the, well, you didn't need to graduate ploy would work. He would just chuckle. He never got me involved with his wheeler dealings, but I knew they weren't legal. I think he knew that I knew that too. We just never spoke about it. He always looked after me, though. I never went without. We weren't rich by any means, but we had enough. It was just me and him. I didn't need anyone else. I never really knew my mother. She died when I was born, and I lived. My dad always said that's what made me extra special. I was his little princess. Now I'm just a few months off my 18th birthday. I'm still his princess, only not so little. Being raised by only my dad made me a bit tougher, especially given the circles he runs in. He taught me how to stick up for myself, but he always said, don't ever start something you can't finish. Which brings me nicely to the jerk on the motorbike. Hey, Rosie, why don't I take you home? The boy yelled across. His voice really grated on me. I'd never been fond of the Irish accent. His green eyes twinkled and he flipped his red hair from his face. Fuck off, Patrick, I yelled back. His fan club, entirely made up of girls, sat on the steps and glared at me. They were mostly cheerleaders. I guessed Patrick was some kind of jock. Basketball, probably. He was too weedy for a footballer.
Oh, come on, Rosie, don't be like that,
he retorted. The dim fucker could never take no for an answer. He was a man whore. He must have had every girl in the school, every girl except me. It didn't stop him trying, though. I rolled my eyes. Go bother one of your little whores, I growled. Or better still, fuck off back to Ireland. I shoved my hands in the pockets of my jean shorts and started to walk home. It was about a 15-minute walk. I could have taken Patrick up on his offer, but it wouldn't have just been a lift home. I could have gone on the bus, but I didn't fancy sitting with the bunch of losers. As soon as I graduated, I was leaving this hellhole. I needed to talk to Dad about letting me work with him. He wasn't going to be happy. I knew he wanted me to do something legal, but he made more money in a day than most people made in a week. Lost in my thoughts, I looked up as I realized I was almost home. Then I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at my house. My house, surrounded by cops. Not just any cops either. Feds, FBI agents, and their labeled bulletproof vests. What the fuck was going on? I quickly crouched behind one of the neighbors' cars, peering at the house, trying to figure out what to do next. Then 2 FBI guys walked out the door with my dad, his hands cuffed behind his back. He saw me. How the hell did he see me when the feds didn't? I'll never know, but he shot me a look. He'd always said that if I ever came home and there were cops outside the house, to leg it. I felt tears pool in my eyes. I didn't know if I'd ever see my dad again, unless this was a big mistake. I somehow felt in my gut that it wasn't. The feds must have realized something was going on because suddenly all eyes were on me. Hey, you! One of them yelled as he started to run toward me. I ran. I hated sports at school, but I was damn good at them. I could run fast and was a good hurdler. I never thought I'd be putting my time on the training field at school to good use, but I did now. I sprinted down the street, then down one of the side alleys, climbed over the fence and down another alley until I was on the next block. I still didn't stop. I kept running as though all the hounds of hell were after me. If my dad was going down, then I would be on my own. I'd end up in the foster system, or worse. When I finally stopped, I must have been about 5 or 6 blocks from my house. It had started to rain. All I had were the clothes I was wearing, $5 in my pocket, and my phone. I didn't even have a jacket. What the hell was I going to do now? I didn't make friends easily, so I had no girlfriends who I could call to put me up for the night. I couldn't go back home. I wrapped my arms around my body in an attempt to keep warm as the rain got heavier. Think, Rosie, I scolded myself. Then I remembered what my dad had said. Uncle Daniel. Uncle Daniel wasn't a real uncle, just a friend of my dad's. My dad trusted him. Well, he used to. I had seen him several times when I was growing up. I was only 5 the first time he came round for dinner. Where Dad used to call me his little princess, Uncle Daniel would call me his kitten, and the nickname stuck. I hadn't seen him for about 5 years. I wasn't sure why he stopped coming round, and I didn't ask. Dad got involved with other people business-wise, and when he had them round, he always told me to make myself scarce. He never did when Uncle Daniel came around. Then a couple of weeks ago, something about my dad had seemed a little off. I couldn't put my finger on it. When I asked him if he was okay, he'd nodded and smiled. I could tell the smile was forced. It reached his lips, but not his eyes. Then he looked at me seriously. "If anything happens to me, Princess, I want you to contact Uncle Daniel." He grabbed my phone and put a number into it. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" I asked. He smiled again. "Course. Come on, let's go get ice cream." I nodded and smiled. I could always be distracted by ice cream. After that, everything was normal again. Until today. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and opened the contacts list. I stared at the number my dad had put into the phone. I hadn't seen him for 5 years. Would he even remember who I was? Back then, I was a cute little kid. Now I'm a grumpy teenager. I sighed and put my phone back in my pocket. Now wasn't the time to call a virtual stranger. I would work something out. I usually did. I shoved my hands back in my pockets and felt the $5 bill. I could at least buy some food, then find somewhere to sleep tonight. Then I could rethink my options in the morning. I looked around and saw a mini-mart, so I headed in there. 10 minutes later, I came out with a bottle of water, a sandwich, and a bar of chocolate. I still had a couple of dollars left. I guess I could keep that for emergencies. Maybe the feds would be gone by the morning. In the meantime, I headed toward the more residential area. There were always houses for sale, plenty of them empty. I'd just find one to squat in tonight. It didn't take long until I found a small property with a for lease sign on the outside. It looked in a pretty bad state of repair, so I figured it would be a fairly safe place to break into. Some of the windows were boarded up, so I jumped over the fence and went into the backyard. The back door was the usual, with panes of glass in the bottom and the top. I found a stone in the backyard and used it to break the glass in the door. Reaching in, I flicked the lock and opened the door. There was no alarm system, which didn't surprise me. The place was too ramshackle for that. I quickly looked around. It looked like I might have struck lucky. The place was a mess. No one had been in yet to clean out the previous tenants' crap. I turned the tap in the kitchen. There was a clunk, but no water. I guessed they'd disconnected the utilities. At least it was dry. Next, I checked out the bedrooms. They were all empty. I'd hoped there would be an old mattress or a blanket left behind, but no such luck. I guessed it would be the floor. I sat down and ate the food I had bought, listening out for any trouble. When there wasn't a sign of anyone else, I laid down on the floor. Using my arm as a pillow, I tried to get some sleep.
Daniel. Chapter 2. Uncle Daniel. I had been surprised when I got a call from Michael a few weeks ago. I hadn't spoken to him or seen him for almost 5 years. He only ever called me when he was in trouble. Not that I minded. It meant I got to see my little kitten. She was the sweetest little thing. She could bring light even to the darkest day. That all changed 5 years ago. She was blossoming into a beautiful young woman. I told Michael as much. He had become angry. He'd said that he didn't want me anywhere near his daughter. I could see his point. If I had been her father, I wouldn't have wanted her going near anyone like me either. I had missed her, though. Her smile could light up a room. Her twinkling eyes were filled with mischievousness. That was what had surprised me about hearing from Michael. He'd asked me to take care of her if something happened. He didn't say what that something might be, but he was trusting me with his little girl, my kitten, and that was all that mattered. I'm not a bad person per se. I just like my women to be young. Not illegal young, but around the same age as my little kitten is now. I'd all but forgotten about Michael's call. That was until one of the boys came through to my office. I was in the middle of checking through a contract. We were expanding, and my contact in Europe had presented me with a gold-plated business opportunity. Not that I needed the money. All the businesses I owned were doing very well, but I was never one to look a gift horse in the mouth. "You ought to check out the news channel, boss," Alex suggested as he knocked on the door and walked into the office. I frowned, slightly annoyed at being interrupted. Reaching for the TV remote, I turned to the news channel and turned up the volume. Breaking news. The FBI has arrested Michael Ryan. Ryan, a small-time crook, is believed to have links to the Marchese crime family. They have seized evidence from his home. The FBI is currently searching for Ryan's daughter, Rosie, who fled the family home after her father's arrest. They believe she may be in danger. Rumor has it that the FBI will be offering Mr. Ryan a deal in exchange for information on Vincent Marchese, who is currently under investigation. I stared at the screen. A picture of my little kitten was plastered across the news channel. I shook my head. "Michael, you really are a fucking idiot. We need to find her quickly," I commanded. Alex nodded. "I'll send one of the boys to the local FBI office. He can pass off as Ryan's brief. If we can get her mobile number, we can track her." I nodded as Alex left the office. I looked back at the screen, still showing the photo of her, and sighed. "Kitten, why on earth didn't you call me, like your daddy told you?" Alex came back to the office a couple of hours later. I hadn't been able to concentrate on the contract I was supposed to be reading. All I could think of was my kitten and how she had managed to give the FBI the slip. My clever little kitten. Alex handed me a piece of paper. That's her cell phone number. Apparently, she arrived at the house just as they were hauling Ryan away. One of the feds gave chase. Alex chuckled, but he gave her the slip. I rolled my eyes. Let's hope we can do better. I looked at the number, then loaded an application on my laptop before plugging my phone into it. One of my many businesses had been the forerunner in designing tracking technology, specifically phone tracking, using a phone's GPS. I just hoped that she hadn't been clever enough to turn it off. My little kitten was bright enough to do that, but hopefully, in the panic, she had forgotten. I dialed the number on the piece of paper and waited as the phone rang at the other end. I glanced at the clock. It was late, just after midnight. "Hello?" a female voice at the other end mumbled. "Kitten, is that you?" I queried. "Yeah," she mumbled again. I looked at the computer. It was still triangulating coordinates. "Did I wake you, kitten? Where are you?" I asked. She didn't need to know I was in the process of tracking her, just in case she decided to bolt again. "I'm fine, Uncle Daniel, really. I'm just getting my head around what happened." I rolled my eyes. "Kitten," I began sternly. "I didn't ask how you were. I asked where you were. Let me come and get you," I said, softening my voice a little. I looked at the computer screen as the tracking program completed. "I'm okay, Uncle Daniel, really. I'll call you in the morning." I smiled, realizing everything was coming together nicely. "Okay, kitten, you promise you'll call me?" I urged. "Yes, Uncle Daniel, I promise." The call ended. She had ended it. I hadn't. It didn't matter, though. I had the coordinates of the phone. If she bolted, the phone location would still show unless she dumped the phone, which I doubted she would. "Well," Alex began. "What now?" I looked at my watch, then at the location. She was several hours away. "Let's go. By the time we get there, it'll be morning anyway."
Rosie. I sat there on the floor, leaning against the wall, wondering what to do next. I shivered, the cold and damp biting into my bones. Maybe I should have told him where I was. If I had, I could have been in the warm. I was suspicious, though. Maybe it's in my nature. Maybe it was living with my dad, who was always suspicious of everyone. I just wondered why he had disappeared from our lives 5 years ago. Now he was suddenly back. Was it something my dad had done, or was it something that Uncle Daniel had done? My dad was obviously in trouble, so he went back to his old friend. Maybe that was his only option. Maybe my dad knew he was about to be arrested. I hated being left in the dark. Why could nobody tell me what was going on? I sat there in the dark, too cold to go back to sleep. Then I heard it. A noise from downstairs. Damn, why had I chosen an upstairs room? There was only one means of escape, and that was the stairs. I ran to the window, which faced the front of the house. I couldn't jump out the window, not without hurting myself. Then I saw it. A dark-colored van. A couple of large men in dark suits were standing next to it. They weren't cops. Were they with Uncle Daniel? Fuck, I hissed under my breath. I pulled out my phone, looking at the GPS icon flashing along the top. Had Uncle Daniel tracked me? Had he known where I was all along? Why would he send men I didn't know? I heard whoever was climbing the stairs. It sounded like more than one person, judging by the footfalls. My heart started to beat wildly in my chest. I felt like a cornered animal. Then I saw the light shining under the door. I knew it wasn't a light from the property. All the utilities were off. It must have been someone with a flashlight. The door opened slowly, and I briefly saw the silhouettes of two men before the flashlight shone brightly in my face. I held my arm up to cover my eyes against the bright light. "Uncle Daniel?" I questioned. "Not quite, Piccolo," the man with the flashlight replied. He had a heavy foreign accent. I was scared now. Maybe they owned the property. "I'm sorry," I stuttered. "I'll just go." I started to walk toward the door, but before I got very far, I felt arms wrap around me, pinning my arms to my side. I tried to struggle, but the man was too strong. The man with the flashlight chuckled. "I don't think so, Piccolo." "E questa la figlia del bastardo?" The one that was holding me asked. "Is this the bastard's daughter?" Damn, these people weren't even speaking my language. Did he just call me a bastard? The man with the flashlight roughly grabbed my hair and yanked my head backward. Pain like 1,000 needles shot through my scalp. I cried out, only for the man to laugh. "Si, è lei. Riportiamola dal capo." Yes, it's her. Let's bring her back to the boss. He pulled something out of his pocket and I realized it was a syringe. "Please, no," I begged. Then I felt a sharp stab in the side of my neck. "Dormi bene, Piccolo." He smirked. "Sleep well, little one." My head started to spin, and I began to feel weak. Surely these men hadn't been sent by Uncle Daniel. Then my vision started to blur as darkness consumed me. Rosie. Chapter 3. Kidnapped. My eyes were heavy, but I was aware of my surroundings. Well, sort of. Aware enough to know I didn't want to open my eyes. I could feel a cloth in my mouth tied in place, rope dug into my wrists, pinned behind my back so I couldn't move them, the same as my ankles. The rope bit into my flesh, chafing my skin. I was lying on something soft, though, not on the floor. I forced my eyes open, then I panicked. I was in a room. Light shone through a large window. I was on a sofa. But that's not what had me panicked. Standing in the room were two large men, similarly dressed to the ones that had grabbed me. Seeing the daylight streaming through the window, I assumed that had been last night. I struggled against the bonds and tried to scream through the gag, but it came out as a whimper. As soon as they heard me, one of the men looked over in my direction. They were different from the men last night. Who were they? How many of them were there? "Sembra che la nostra piccola puttana si sia finalmente svegliata," he scoffed. "It looks like our little whore has finally woken up." He started to walk toward me, causing me to panic more. I felt tears trickle down my face. I hadn't even realized I was crying as I strained against the bindings and squealed through the gag. His hand wrapped around my throat, tight enough to be a threat, but I was still able to breathe. "You'll be a good girl, yes?" he asked, his English clipped, his accent strong. I quickly nodded, whimpering through the gag. He licked his lips and looked across at the other man, smirking. The other man rolled his eyes. "Sbrigati, Marco! Voglio scoparla prima che ritorni anche il vecchio." "Hurry up, Marco. I want to fuck her before the old man returns too." The man gripping my throat chuckled. "Pazienza, amico mio. Sei un sacco di tempo." Patience, my friend. There is plenty of time. Then I felt his hand sliding underneath my t-shirt, his fingers gliding across the skin of my stomach. I screamed and arched my back, trying to pull away from him. His grip around my neck shifted as he grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. "Stai zitto, puttana," he growled. "Shut up, bitch." I could tell it was some sort of insult. I had never been a screamer or a crier, but now I couldn't help myself as I sobbed through the gag and tears streamed down my cheeks. His hand moved to my breast and gave it a sharp squeeze. "Così reattivo," He smirked, so responsive. I screamed again, in between sobs. His hand let go of my hair. Ho dedo di star zito, he growled. I said, shut up. With each syllable, his hand slammed down on the bare skin of my upper thigh. It hurt so bad. All I could hear was the sound of my heart thudding against my ribcage and the noise of my sobs through the gag. I screwed my eyes shut, trying to blot out what was happening, knowing that it would only get worse. A third voice invaded my senses. It was deep, dominant, and authoritative. Stacca le mani da quel bambino, pezzo di merda, he growled. Take your hands off that kid, you piece of shit. I felt his hands leave my body as he stepped away from me. Then I heard a loud bang and a thud. I knew what the bang was as it echoed around the room. It was a gunshot. I sobbed even harder, and my whole body started to shake. If it hadn't been for the gag, I would have been sick. Chiunque altro la toccherà avranno lo stesso destino di quel pezzo di merda, he growled. Anyone else touch her, they will have the same fate as that piece of shit. I heard several voices respond. Si, Don Marchesi. Yes, Don Marchesi. I felt bile rise in my throat as I realized who these people were. They were speaking Italian. They called him Don. This was the mob, the Italian mafia. I felt the sofa dip as someone sat on it. I wanted to stop crying, but I couldn't. I felt a hand gently touch my head. I flinched and tried to pull away as I sobbed a little harder. Piccolo, you're safe now, he whispered as he removed the gag. His accent wasn't as strong, not like the others, but it was still there. At least I could understand what he said. I opened my eyes. Everything was a blur as tears clouded my vision. His thumb stroked my cheek. Così bello, così innocente, he whispered. So beautiful, so innocent. Then I heard him snap his fingers. Tu taglia queste maledette corde e ripulisci questo casino. You, cut these damned ropes and clean up this mess. I heard footsteps, then something pulled at the ropes. The ropes fell away and my hands and ankles were free. Before I had a chance to do anything, I felt a strong arm wrap around my waist and another slide under my knees as I was lifted off the sofa. I felt the urge to struggle and fight back, but this man had saved me. He'd killed the man that was about to rape me. I was sure of that. Instead, I just carried on crying. I couldn't help myself. I realized that I was in the hands of the Italian mafia, and I had no control over my future. Was this my dad's doing? Was this who he was working for? The reason why I had to hide in my room when he had business associates over? Then I heard his voice again, its deep tones soothing me when it really should be frightening me. Just relax, Gattina. Sei mia ora, he whispered. Kitten, you are mine now. When he spoke to me, it was mostly in English. Sometimes a strange word would be thrown in, which I assumed was Italian. The words were never spoken harshly, though, not like the others had spoken. I guessed their words were curses or insults. He carried me up the stairs of what seemed like a mansion. Even the staircase was double the size of a normal one. Then he took me into a bedroom. I panicked immediately. Maybe I had jumped from the frying pan and into the fire. He laid me gently on the bed. I watched as he took off his jacket and threw it on a chair. He carefully removed the cufflinks from his shirt. They were gold with a diamond centerpiece. He placed them on a dressing table, then he carefully rolled up his sleeves. Please don't, I whimpered. He frowned, then he gently stroked my face. I'm sorry, Piccolo. The men downstairs, they should know better. I would never, he soothed. I now had a chance to look at not only my captor, but my savior. His face was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Why would I? He was an Italian mob boss. I'd never seen him before. I put the thought from my mind. For a mafia boss, he wasn't old. Probably the same age as my dad. He was a lot more muscular than my dad, though. His complexion was darker, too. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his eyes were dark brown. He sported a neatly trimmed beard, which did little to hide his sharp jawline or the scar that ran across his cheek. He was dressed similarly to the other men. I say similarly because his clothes were clearly designer, while theirs were off the peg. He didn't wear a tie either, just a crisp white shirt with the top buttons undone. A gold chain adorned his neck. His forearms had a large tattoo, which I could only assume continued right up his arm. Why am I here? I whispered, my voice cracking. His thumb grazed across my cheek. All in good time, Gatina. For now, I think we need to find you a change of clothes. He stood up and walked across the room. He opened a set of double doors, which hid a walk-in closet. When he returned, he was carrying a shirt and a pair of boxers. He put them down on the bed and pointed to another door. That's the bathroom, Gatina. You probably want to get cleaned up. I'll be back in 20 minutes, then you can have something to eat. Does that sound okay? He asked. I wanted to scream, "No, I want to go home!" But that wasn't really an option. Home was probably still crawling with cops, and my dad wouldn't be there. I suddenly realized I should be calling Uncle Daniel. Do you have my phone? I was supposed to call my uncle. He chuckled. Of course you were, Gatina. I suddenly realized how lame that sounded. That's probably what every kidnapped person says. My family will be looking for me. I looked down at the floor and sighed. I'd lost all my fight after today. I'll leave you to get cleaned up, Gatina. He chuckled as he nodded toward the bathroom. As he headed to the door, I looked up and called after him. My name is Rosie. He looked at me and smiled. Oh, I know exactly who you are, Gatina. I watched him as he opened the door and left, confusion on my face. How did he know who I was? I still had no idea who he was. I picked up the clothes and headed to the bathroom. It was huge, bigger than my bedroom back home. There was a huge shower, a big corner bathtub with jets, and double sinks with mirrors above each one. There was a big heated towel rail on one wall, filled with fluffy white towels. I closed the door and locked it. I felt dirty. All I could think about was that filthy bastard's hands all over me. Was it wrong that I wasn't sorry he was dead? I shuddered. Not just at the thought, but also because the person that had saved me had no hesitation in shooting him. Even if I thought about escaping, the fear of being caught was 10 times worse. He would probably shoot me too. I just wished I knew why I had been taken. It was for more than just squatting in that house. I stripped off my clothes and looked between the bath and the shower. A shower would be quicker, but a bath might help me soak away the stress and the ache in my shoulder muscles. I didn't know how long I had been tied up, but it was long enough for my muscles to feel sore. I started to run the bath. Steam began to fill the room. I stepped into the tub filled with hot water. As I sat down, I winced and glanced at the top of my leg. It was still red from where the dead man had hit me. I leaned back in the bath, letting the hot water relax me. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine I was anywhere else other than here.
Vincent. Chapter 4. Vincent. I walked back to my office, smiling. I didn't very often, but that sweet little girl had put a smile on my face. She was so young, so innocent, so perfect. The only thing that took the smile off my face was the thought of that filthy bastard touching her. If I hadn't seen him on the cameras, God knows what he would have done. It gave me a lot of pleasure, ending his life. I would have preferred it to have been slowly, but the others needed to know that wasn't acceptable. She was just supposed to be a hostage, a little leverage. Then I found out who she was, and everything started to make sense. I opened the office door, stepped inside, closed the door, and locked it. I logged into the computer, quickly sent an email, then opened the CCTV feed. With a few keystrokes, the feed from the hidden camera in my bathroom came up. I looked at the screen. She was beginning to undress. I could tell when I carried her up the stairs how perfect that little body was. Now I could see it for myself, perfect except for the red mark on her thigh. My poor little kitten. I watched as she stepped into the bath, wincing when she sat down. Then my phone rang. I had to smirk. I knew exactly who it was. I accepted the call. Where is she, you bastard? What have you done to her? If you've touched a hair on her head, I swear. Daniel, my brother, what a pleasant surprise. I smirked. You got the photo then? I looked at the photograph of Rosie tied up with a gag in her mouth. One had been sent to Daniel, the other would be shown to her father. If you touch a hair on her head, I swear I'll kill you, Vincent. She's mine. I chuckled. You know, brother, You should really look after your toys a little better. It was so easy to hack into your computer and your tracking software. I heard him sigh down the phone. Vincent, I want her back, he groaned. I rolled my eyes. I'm sure you do, but you should have thought about that before you set your stupid friend up. What did you think, Daniel? Kill two birds with one stone? Get rid of her father and your brother? Did you really think I would be that easy to take down? You made your decision when you left the family, Daniel. The only reason you're alive is because I persuaded Papa not to kill you. Don't make me regret it, I growled. You don't want her, Vincent. She's nothing to you. You're only doing this to get back at me, Daniel hissed. I smiled. He probably knew I was enjoying this. That's where you're wrong, Daniel. I'll give you one thing. She is a pretty little thing. She's naked right now, lying in the bathtub in my bathroom. I glanced at the screen. She was lying in the bath with her eyes closed. I've decided to keep her for myself, my own Gatina. You bastard, Daniel growled. I'll get her back, I swear, if it's the last thing I do. I chuckled. Good luck with that, brother. I pressed the button to end the call and chucked the phone on the desk. Then I looked at the camera feed. I panicked slightly. My silly little kitten had fallen asleep in the bath. Don't drown yourself, Gatina. I haven't finished with you yet. I smirked. I turned off the screen and stood up, heading back to my bathroom to retrieve my little kitten. When I tried the bathroom door and it wouldn't open, I rolled my eyes. Of course she would lock it. I pulled a bunch of keys out of my trouser pocket, found the master key, and unlocked the bathroom door. I couldn't help but smile, seeing her lying in the bath, fast asleep. I walked over and dipped my fingers in the water. It was still quite warm. At least she wouldn't catch her cold. I would scold her, though. She could easily drown, falling asleep in the bath. I grabbed a towel off the rail and gently lifted her out. She moaned. The sound was like music to my ears. I quickly wrapped her in the towel. She didn't wake as I carried her back to the bedroom. She was a tiny little thing. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall and was as light as a feather. I sat down on the bed with her on my lap and gently started to dry her off. The friction of the towel on her skin must have woken her. Her eyes snapped open and she squealed. Then she tried to squirm away from me. I held her tightly until she stopped. Then she let out a whimper. Shh, Gatina. You fell asleep in the bath. The last thing I want is for you to drown. She stilled slightly and stared at me with those big blue eyes. She looked so scared. Do I scare you, Gatina? I asked, my gaze holding hers. She looked away and nodded, biting her bottom lip. I brushed my thumb across it. You shouldn't do that, Gatina, unless you want me to, scare you even more. I smirked. Her face flushed. Perhaps she wasn't so innocent after all. By the time I'd finished with her, she wouldn't be. Now, I began, as I moved her from my lap and onto the bed. Let's get you dressed, shall we? I stood up and retrieved the clothes from the bathroom. When I walked back into the bedroom, her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, holding the towel tightly. I snickered. It's not like I haven't seen you naked before, is it, Gatina? Her face flushed bright red. She was about to bite her bottom lip, but then she thought better of it. It was just as well. The way she looked at me when she did it before was arousing me way too much. Was this why Daniel was so attracted to her? What does it mean, Gatina? She whispered, glancing at me, then quickly dropping her gaze. I sat down on the bed next to her. I gently placed my finger under her chin, tilting it so she had to look at me. It's just a pet name, I smirked, thinking of Daniel. I knew he always called her Kitten. Now it was my turn, except she didn't know that I was calling her exactly the same. Do you like it? I asked. Then I smirked. Or do you prefer Kitten? She gasped and opened her mouth slightly. I could see her little mind working overtime. It wouldn't take long for her to put 2 and 2 together and likely come up with 5. I picked up the shirt from the bed. Now put this on. She stared at me, taking the shirt in one hand and clutching the towel to her chest with the other. I narrowed my eyes. I don't like to repeat myself, I scolded, glaring at her. Would you mind turning your back? She whispered. Please. She asked so nicely, but I wasn't in the mood for compromises. No, just put it on, I growled. Her face flushed. It couldn't have turned any redder. She was mine now. She would have to get used to me seeing her body. She turned away from me slightly and let the towel pool around her waist as she put on my shirt. It was huge on her, but I liked it. Come here, Gatina, I urged. She turned to face me, her face still red as a beetroot. I leaned close to her and buttoned up the shirt, leaving the top 2 buttons undone. There, now lay on your stomach, I demanded. Her hands gripped the towel that had pooled around her waist. She stared at me, a terrified look on her face. Now, Gatina, you need to start doing as you're told. You're going to be here for quite a while, so don't test me, I growled. I could see tears pooling in her eyes, but she had to learn to trust me. She let the towel drop and lay on the bed on her stomach. The shirt covered her bottom for now. Stay there and don't move, I ordered, as I got up from the bed and headed back into the bathroom. I grabbed some aloe vera gel from the bathroom cabinet and walked back into the bedroom. She was still lying on her stomach. There were no tears, which I was thankful for. Good girl, now just relax, I soothed. I felt her go tense as soon as I lifted the shirt from her bottom. I looked at the red mark on the top of her thigh. He'd really hit her hard, the bastard. I squirted some gel onto my hand and gently started to rub it onto her thigh. She gasped at first. Then I noticed that she had begun to relax. This should take some of the soreness away, I soothed. I continued to rub in the gel, enjoying the feel of her soft skin on my fingers, taking more time than I probably needed to. Does that feel better, Gatina? I whispered. She nodded. Yes, thank you. She hesitated, and I chuckled deeply. She knew nothing about me, not even my name, only what her imagination had carved out. You may call me Vincent, Gatina, I said. I picked up the boxers still lying on the bed and tossed them in front of her. Now put these on. I walked over to the dressing table as I saw her scramble to put the boxers on without me seeing anything. When I turned around, she was standing next to the bed, holding the hem of the shirt. She looked absolutely terrified. I sat down on the bed with my legs astride. I patted the space in between. Sit here, I urged. She hesitated again. This was getting annoying. Either sit here or I'll use this hairbrush on your arse, I hissed. She quickly did as I asked. I rested one hand on her shoulder. I could feel her trembling as I started to brush her long, chocolate-brown hair. How do you normally wear your hair, Gatina? I asked, as I finished brushing her soft locks that reached the center of her back. Like this, she whispered. I smiled and pushed her hair so it draped over one shoulder, leaving the other side of her neck bare. Good, I whispered. I like it like that. I gently pressed my lips to the side of her neck. I felt her tremble as a small gasp escaped her lips. It was different this time, though. There was no fear. I felt the slight arch of her back as she leaned into me, not shying away like before.
Rosie. Chapter 5. Breakfast on the terrace. It was like living on a knife's edge. I didn't know what this man was going to do next. He asked me if I was scared of him. How stupid was that? He'd kidnapped me, one of his men had tried to molest me, then I'd seen him shoot someone. I would be an idiot not to be scared. The size of him, he could break me in two with his little finger if he wanted to. One minute, he was demanding I do things I wasn't comfortable doing, but then, on the flip side, he could be so gentle. The way he carried me from the bath when I fell asleep, and the cream on my leg, then brushing my hair. When he ran his thumb over my lips and kissed my neck, I shouldn't have liked it, but I did. My brain was telling me no, but my body reacted all by itself. It seemed that whenever I did something he asked, he was gentle and kind, but if I hesitated, the mean, mad side came out. I was convinced now he was some mafia boss, the foreign language. I knew enough about foreign languages to know that sigh in Italian meant yes. I couldn't understand, though, why all those men were speaking Italian. We were in America, after all. I was half afraid to ask him anything for fear of annoying him. I was curious, though, like when he said he would call me Kitten. Uncle Daniel was the only one who ever called me that. Did he know him? Did he know my dad? Was he going to hold me for ransom, and if they didn't pay up, would he kill me? Would he kill me anyway? He said I was safe, but I didn't feel it. Not really. After he finished brushing my hair, he guided me from the room, his hand resting on the back of my neck. It felt comforting and scary at the same time. Comforting because he held it gently, scary because he had control over me. One wrong move and he could snap my neck in two. He guided me down the stairs. I was grateful that there was carpet everywhere because I had no shoes on. The only shoes I had were my trainers, and I'd left those in the bathroom. That was another weird thing. The clothes that I wore now were his. They kind of smelled like him. His aftershave, I guessed. Was this how it was going to be from now on? Me wearing his clothes. I didn't even have any underwear, which, considering what had occurred earlier, made me feel extremely vulnerable. When we reached the ground floor, it was like nothing had happened. There were no men downstairs, at least not that I could see. There was no blood or any sign of the man he had shot. Then we went through some double doors, and we were in the kitchen. There was no carpet, but the terracotta tiles were warm. Underfloor heating, I guessed. Several women were milling about in the kitchen, dressed in black. An older woman seemed to be bossing them around. Vincent called out to the older woman. "Mama, posso fare colazione per il mio gattina? Mom, can I have breakfast for my kitten?" Was this Vincent's mom? I also recognized the word gattina. Was he referring to me? The woman turned around. There was a resemblance to Vincent. She gasped. "Vincenzo, che cosa hai fatto? Sembra proprio Amelia. Lei non è la tua e lei? Non tua figlia? Vincenzo, what have you done? It looks like Amelia. She's not yours, is she? Not your daughter?" I didn't understand a word of what she said, but her tone made me think she was scolding him. Vincent rolled his eyes, then laughed. "No, Mama, era la gattina di Danny e la figlia di Michael, adesso è mia." "No, Mom, she was Danny's kitten and Michael's daughter. Now she's mine." His mother glanced at me, then she looked back at Vincent and laughed. "Questo insegnerà loro a diventare nemici del mio ragazzo intelligente. Ti sono sempre piaciuti Giovanni e Carini. Cerca di non romperla troppo in fretta, Vincenzo. This will teach them to become an enemy of my clever boy. You have always liked them young and cute. Try not to break her too fast, Vincenzo." Vincent chuckled. He moved his hand from my neck to the small of my back and guided me out of the kitchen. As we left and entered the dining room, I heard his mother say something to one of the other women. "Vado a prendere mio figlio e la sua piccola puttana a fare colazione. Velocemente adesso. Go and fetch my son and his little whore some breakfast. Quickly now." I recognized one of the words. It was the same one the men who had me tied up had used. If Vincent heard it, he didn't take any notice. I didn't think it was pleasant, whatever it was. We didn't stop in the dining room. Instead, we went through another set of doors. I was surprised as we were on a little terrace with a small table and 2 chairs. I gasped when I realized we were no longer in the city. In fact, looking around, we were nowhere near the city. "You see, Gattina, even if you were planning to run away," Vincent smirked, "which I can imagine you probably were, there is no place for you to go." I felt my heart beating hard against my chest. Where are we?" I stuttered. Vincent leaned toward me and grazed his thumb across my cheek. "This is where I was born, Tesoro. We are in Sicily. This is my family home." He smirked. Tears pooled in my eyes as I cupped my hand across my mouth. This couldn't be happening. The house I was in just before his men grabbed me, I was in one of the suburbs of New York. I had been at school. My dad? What had happened to him? And Uncle Daniel? I shook my head in disbelief. "No, this can't be. I have school, and my dad—" I gasped. Vincent stood up and walked behind me. He put one hand on my shoulder and the other he gently wrapped around my throat. There was no pressure, but it didn't mean I wasn't scared. Then he whispered in my ear, his breath fanning my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. "Your father and your uncle crossed me. No one crosses me, Gattina, and gets away with it. So now I have you. No harm will come to you as long as you obey me and don't try to run. Do you understand?" It was a warning, a threat, the way his hand held my throat, gently but with a sense of danger. I quickly nodded. "Use your words, Gattina. I need to hear you say it," he hissed. "Yes, I understand," I whispered. He loosened his grip and his hand stroked my neck and slowly moved up to stroke my face. "Good girl," he whispered. I felt him kiss the top of my head. He stood up straight and returned to his chair just as a young woman brought out a tray of food. Suddenly, I wasn't very hungry. I was stranded in a strange country where the only person who seemed to speak my language was my kidnapper, a monster who had no qualms about killing anyone who got in his way. The young woman put the plates on the table, along with 2 cups of coffee and 2 glasses of orange juice. She then bowed her head to Vincent and left. I looked at the food. I hadn't eaten in days, but the thought of food now turned my stomach. Vincent had already started to tuck into his plate. It looked like some sort of omelet. He looked at me and smiled. "Go ahead, eat," he enthused. I picked up the fork and put some of the omelet in my mouth. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have liked it. Right now, it felt like I was eating cardboard. I pushed the food around my plate. As I did, Vincent frowned. "What's the matter? Don't you like it? Would you like something else?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm not really hungry." Vincent rolled his eyes. "Nonsense, you haven't eaten for almost 3 days." He scoffed. That hit me like a freight train. 3 days. They'd drugged me and I'd been unconscious for that long. Then the realization hit me. Of course I had. 1 minute I'd been in New York. Now I was somewhere in Italy. I had no clue where. Geography had never been my strong suit. Then something snapped inside of me. I glared at Vincent and slammed my fork down on the plate. "You expect me to be hungry?" I yelled. "I've been drugged, kidnapped, almost raped, threatened, and dragged halfway across the world where I don't understand a word anyone says. You think I can eat?" Vincent stood up slowly, returning my glare. His eyes looked at me coldly. "You think you've been threatened, piccolo ragazza?" he growled. I cowered in the chair. Then he reached behind him and pulled out a gun. I should have realized he carried one. After all, I'd already seen him shoot someone. He pointed the barrel at the middle of my forehead. "This," he growled, "this is a threat." I stared at him in horror. He was going to shoot me. I gasped as I threw myself back in the chair. Too late, I realized the chair was tipping backward. After that, it seemed like everything happened in slow motion. The chair continued falling backward until my head hit the tiled floor below. I screamed as pain shot through my head, then my vision blurred. The last thing I saw was the look of shock on Vincent's face before I blacked out completely. Rosie. Chapter 6. Some Answers. I groaned. My head hurt. "We're waking up." I opened my eyes and squinted. I was back in the bedroom, lying on the bed. A young man with blonde hair was sitting on the edge. He was clearly American by his accent. "Who are you?" I groaned. He smiled. "My name is Andrew. I'm a doctor." I looked toward the foot of the bed, and Vincent was standing there with his arms folded. "My head hurts," I complained. Andrew nodded. "That tends to happen when you hit your head hard." "He was going to shoot me," I whispered. Andrew glanced at Vincent, who shook his head and rolled his eyes. Then he leaned toward me. "If Vincent wanted to shoot you, he would have done." He smirked. I narrowed my eyes. "He kidnapped me," I whispered, slightly horrified that another American was sitting there, knowing exactly who Vincent was and what he had done. Andrew chuckled. "I don't doubt it." He stood up and walked over to where Vincent was standing. "She may have a slight concussion. She'll have a headache for a while. Make sure she rests and drinks plenty of fluids. She's a little dehydrated." I watched as he handed Vincent a small bottle of tablets. "Painkillers if she needs them." Andrew glanced at me and smiled. "Try to rest, Miss Ryan. I'll come back in a couple of days to see how you are." Then he spoke to Vincent in Italian. "Le pillole la renderanno assonata. Lo guarderei. Ti tradirà alla prima occasione." "The pills will make her sleepy. I'd watch it. She will betray you at the first opportunity," Vincent chuckled. "Non preoccuparti, amico mio, non ne avrà l'opportunità." "Don't worry, my friend, she won't have the opportunity." I sighed and closed my eyes. I heard the bedroom door close, but I knew he was still in the room. Vincent, that is. How was I supposed to know he wouldn't shoot me? After all, this was nothing to do with me. It was to do with my dad and Uncle Daniel. If he hated them that much, why would he keep me alive? What really hurt was that a fellow American didn't think it was wrong that I had been snatched from my home and family. I felt the bed dip, so I turned my head away. I felt his hand rest on my thigh. I flinched, but he ignored it as his thumb gently rubbed up and down on my skin. I turned my head to look at him, tears pooling in my eyes. "You said you wouldn't hurt me?" I whispered, my voice cracking. His thumb grazed my cheek, wiping away an errant tear. "I didn't. You fell," he stated. I frowned. You pointed a gun at me, at my head. I thought you were going to shoot me." My voice was becoming more high-pitched. "But I didn't, did I?" he replied, his voice remaining perfectly calm, gentle even. I closed my eyes and sighed. If I was expecting an apology, I would be sorely disappointed. My eyes opened when I heard a knock at the door. "Come," he replied sharply. When the door opened, a young girl stood there dressed similarly to the girls in the kitchen. She carried a tray which she placed on a small table. She bowed and left the room. "Why does everyone bow to you?" I asked, my brow furrowing. He smirked. "It's a sign of respect, one which you seem to struggle with. Now sit up. You need to eat something." I groaned. "Can't I have one of those?" I pointed at the bottle of tablets in his hand as I struggled to sit. The slight movement caused my head to throb. "Once you've eaten something, I'll give you one of these." He shook the bottle to make a point. I brought my hands to my head. "You'll keep me in pain unless I do what you want." Vincent chuckled. "No, that will only happen if I have to punish you. The bottle clearly states they should be taken with food." I felt my face flush, slightly embarrassed and worried I might have put an idea into his head. "Open," he demanded. I looked up and he held a spoon in his hand. It looked like a spoonful of eggs. "I can feed myself," I objected. He rolled his eyes. "You didn't do a very good job on that score this morning, Gatina." I sighed and opened my mouth. I knew he wouldn't relent, and I really needed that painkiller. He proceeded to feed me the rest of the scrambled egg. It was surprisingly good, but then anything would be after not having eaten for 3 days. Vincent opened the bottle of pills, then grabbed my hand. He tapped the bottle until one pill fell out on the palm of my hand. Then he passed me a glass of water. I popped the pill in my mouth and took a gulp. Vincent chuckled. "You're not worried about me poisoning you then?" I stared at him, horror on my face. Would he? He laughed again. "Don't worry, Gatina. I wouldn't waste good food on you if I was going to kill you." He took the glass from my hand. "Now lie down." I didn't argue. The pain in my head was already beginning to fade, but I felt a bit dizzy. I frowned. "Why do you hate them so much? My dad and Uncle Daniel?" His face darkened. I'd said the wrong thing again. Last time he'd pointed a gun at me. "You might as well drop the uncle. We both know he's not your real uncle. As for your father, well, he has a loose tongue, which needs to be silenced." I gasped as my heart hammered loudly in my chest. I realized now the FBI, my kidnap, him, they were all related. "He worked for you, didn't he? That's why he was arrested. That's why you kidnapped me, to make sure he doesn't talk?" Vincent stood up. "You need to rest," he stated as he walked away from the bed. I pushed myself up so that I was sitting. "What will you do if he talks? Are you going to kill me?" I asked, my voice shaking. Vincent turned around and walked toward the bed. I scuttled back. I swallowed back the bile that was threatening to rise in my throat. He sat on the edge of the bed. His hand gently touched my face. "No, Gatina, I won't kill you. It's enough that your father thinks I will. Besides," he lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I kind of like having you around." I felt my cheeks heat up. "Now lie down and rest," he commanded. I quickly lay back down. This time he didn't get up. He just sat there gazing at me. I had so many questions. What was my dad doing working for the mafia? How was Uncle Daniel, Daniel, involved? Surely people would be looking for me. Wouldn't my dad tell them I had been taken? Vincent put his hand on my head and stroked my forehead with his thumb. I closed my eyes. I was feeling sleepy anyway, but his gentle hands made me feel calm. Good, even. Why was that? Then I heard him speak. I didn't understand what he said, but whenever he spoke like that, I would get a knot in my stomach and my face would heat up. Sei un gattino così innocente, dormi bene. You are such an innocent kitten. Sleep well. Then I felt his breath fanning my face as his lips brushed mine. I opened my eyes and touched my fingers to my lips. Vincent looked at me and smiled.
Don't look so surprised, Katina. Those lips have been begging to be kissed.
I stared at him but didn't respond. I licked my lips. Vincent chuckled.
Did I steal your first kiss, Piccolo?
I nodded. Despite being chased by the boys at school, I never really wanted anything to do with them. Outside of school, I never met any boys. I was always with my dad. Vincent licked his lips and smiled. Close your eyes now and rest. I did, hoping he would kiss me again, but he didn't, so I drifted off to sleep, a little disappointed.
Vincent. Chapter 7. Plans. I sat there staring at her. Even after she had fallen asleep, those lips, so perfect. I just couldn't resist a taste. I was surprised when she didn't kick up a fuss, even more so when she admitted she'd never been kissed. Fuck, she was so innocent. Was that what I liked about her so much? Or was it the fact I had stolen her from Daniel? Or perhaps it was because she was Michael Ryan's daughter. The perfect revenge. After all, I was Don Marchesi, head of the Marchesi crime family, the Italian mafia. I always got what I wanted, and right now, I wanted Rosie Ryan. I left the bedroom and headed back to my office. She would sleep for a while now. I could keep an eye on her from my office and get some work done. As I reached the office door, I heard my name being called. Only one of my men dared call me by my name. Christian. He was my second in command and my best friend. It should have been Daniel if he hadn't been a traitor. Vincent, we need to talk. I nodded and unlocked the office door. He followed me in. I walked behind the desk, then sat down. I flicked on the computer and brought up the camera feed in the bedroom. Then I looked at Christian. He was already sitting on the chair in front of me. Have we made contact with Ryan yet? I asked. Christian nodded. Our best man is going to the prison today. He'll show Ryan the picture and tell him what we want. I nodded. Good. Was there something else? Christian took a deep breath. I could see something was bothering him. What are you going to do with the girl? You know we can't let her go. I glanced at the screen. My little kitten was still fast asleep. I have no intention of letting her go, Christian. I smirked. Christian ran his fingers through his hair. And what if Ryan doesn't agree, or your brother tries to get involved? We don't want to look weak in this. I narrowed my eyes. I knew what he was saying. If Ryan decided his life wasn't worth his daughter's, then under normal circumstances, we would send the hostage back in pieces, one piece at a time. You let me worry about that, Christian. By the time this is over, my brother and Ryan will be dead, and I'll have his little princess eating out of my hand. I chuckled at the memory of feeding her just now. In truth, she was already eating out of my hand. Christian shook his head, but he was smiling. That fucking family is going to be the death of us. He smirked. I bit my bottom lip and grinned. I've waited a long time for this, Christian. My brother thought he was playing me. He's the one who's going to be played, my friend. Christian stood up and nodded. He deserves it after what he did. I watched as he headed toward the door. Hey, Christian, take one of the girls into town. I need some clothes for our little guest. You know the sort of things I like. No heels, though. She needs to still look innocent. I chuckled. Christian rolled his eyes. I hope she's worth it, Vincent. I smirked as he left the room. Oh, she was definitely going to be worth it. I picked up the phone and dialed. After a couple of rings, it was picked up. Hello? A gruff voice replied. I recognized the voice immediately. Alex, is everything in place? Yes, he hissed. But you really shouldn't call me. What if Daniel was listening? I chuckled. Is he? Of course not, Alex replied testily. Then it isn't a problem besides. I looked at my watch. He's nothing if not a creature of habit. How is he coping with the loss of his little kitten? I asked. He's pissed, Alex grunted. I'll be glad when this is all over. I chuckled. Don't worry, my friend. It soon will be, and when it is, you'll be a very rich man. I hung up. Everything was going perfectly according to plan. After a couple of hours of working, I sighed. Being the head of the family wasn't all it was cracked up to be sometimes. It was mostly paperwork and occasional meetings. When my father was in charge, I was more hands-on. Like when I had killed that piece of shit downstairs. I missed those days. Of course, there were benefits. I didn't often have to worry about being attacked unless it was in an underhand way, which brought my thoughts back to Michael, Ryan, and my brother Daniel. Did they really think they could hand me over to the feds that easily? I had eyes and ears everywhere. My brother was no better than that piece of shit downstairs, and Michael was an idiot for trusting him. I glanced at the screen. My little kitten was still fast asleep. She didn't know how lucky she was. I'd saved her from the clutches of Daniel. What sort of person grooms a child so they can get their hands on her when she becomes a young woman? And what kind of father lets him? A knock on the door disturbed my thoughts. Come, I grunted. Christian poked his head around the door. I've sent the girls to your room to put away the clothes, he murmured. I nodded. Just make sure they don't wake her, or they'll have me to deal with. I glanced back at the screen. I didn't know what was in the pills that Andrew had given me, but she still seemed dead to the world. Christian chuckled and closed the door, leaving me once again in peace. I didn't look at the camera feed after the girls entered the room. I knew that they would be quiet. They knew better than to wake my little kitten. It was about half an hour later that I looked at the screen. The doors to the closet were closed, so I knew they had finished and likely left the room. I glanced at the bed. Something wasn't right. The last time I looked, my little kitten had been restfully asleep. This wasn't the case now. She was thrashing about on the bed. I quickly left the office and headed back to the bedroom. As I entered the room, all I could hear was her moaning and crying, her head thrashing back and forth on the pillow. Beads of sweat trickled down her temples, and her hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my hand firmly but gently on her forehead, holding her head still. I wondered if this was the result of the concussion or something else. She was still whimpering and moaning, still fighting with some demon in her dream. I gently tapped her cheek with the palm of my hand. Wake up, kitten, I urged. With still no response, I tapped her face a little harder. She whimpered, then her eyes snapped open. She stared around the room, panic-stricken. Then her face crumpled as she started to sob. I wasn't quite sure whether it was from the sudden realization of where she was or the nightmare she was having. Perhaps it was a combination of both. Whatever it was, I hated seeing her distraught. She was in a situation not of her making. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her into my chest. She didn't fight to pull away. In fact, if anything, she pressed her head into my chest. I gently stroked her hair as her breath came in gasps in between sobs. I was tempted to ask her about it, but felt now wasn't the time. It's okay, Piccolo, it was just a bad dream, I soothed. I slowly swept the sticky hair from her face. The clothes she was wearing were damp with sweat. Let's get you cleaned up and get you some fresh clothes, I whispered. She nodded. I'm sorry, she whimpered. I shushed her, holding her until her sobs subsided. Maybe this was just what I needed, a chance to show her I was the good guy. Certainly better than my brother or her waste of space of a father. I picked her up and carried her into the bathroom. She clung to me tightly. Whatever she had been dreaming about had shaken her up badly. Was it a dream or a bad memory resurfacing? She'd been through so much in the past few days. I truly believed that I was the only one with her best interests at heart. Michael. Chapter 8. The Offer. I lay on the bed of the prison cell. They'd stashed me in a single cell for now. I guess they figured it would give me time to think. Also, to stop any of Marchese's men from ending my life prematurely. I wasn't about to say anything to anyone, not until I knew my little princess was safe. Rosie, 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 why didn't you go find Uncle Daniel, as I told you? He wasn't the best choice I had to take care of you, but I knew he would keep you safe. Instead, I had a visit from his assistant, pretending to be my brief, wanting her mobile number. I hoped to God he would find her before Marchese's goons did. I looked up as the door to the cell opened. I frowned as I looked at one of the guards. Any of them could be working for Marchese. Just because the FBI thought I was safe didn't mean I was. "Come with me, Ryan. Your brief's here." I stood up and walked toward the door. He pulled out a nightstick and held it against my chest. I stopped dead and swallowed hard. Was this a ruse? Was he really one of Marchese's men, or was I just being paranoid? He pulled a set of cuffs off his belt with the other hand. I rolled my eyes and held out my hands. He quickly clipped them on and put away the nightstick. I inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. I was in way over my head, and I knew it. He walked me to one of the interview rooms, shoved me in through the door, and stood outside. I frowned. This wasn't the same man who had asked for Rosie's cell phone number. This man was small and shrewish, with wire-framed spectacles. He looked like a lawyer. He had a briefcase with him. "Who are you?" I demanded, before I even considered sitting down. He smirked. "Philip Moretti. I'm here to help you." He pointed at the chair and gestured for me to sit. I did so reluctantly. The man opened his briefcase and took something out. It looked like a photograph, but he slid it across the table face down. I glared at him. What the hell was this? "Go on, take a look," he smirked. I slowly turned it over. My face paled as I saw my little Rosie tied up with a gag in her mouth. I stood up, sending the chair flying backward. "I swear to God, if you touch a hair on her head, I'll—" I didn't finish the sentence before he interrupted me. "You'll do what exactly, Mr. Ryan? I don't think you're in a position to do anything," he sneered. I picked up the chair and sat back down. I rested my head in my hands. "What do you want?" I asked. The man cleared his throat and picked up the photo, putting it back in his briefcase. "As I said before, I want to help you and, more importantly, your daughter." I lifted my head and stared at him. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He smiled, a sick smile that told me I didn't really have any choice. "Mr. Marchese," he hesitated, "wants you to sign this. If you do, he'll take care of your daughter. Make sure she wants for nothing." He pulled a document from the briefcase and slid it across the table. I looked at it. It was a legal document, a signed affidavit that could be used as evidence in court. I started to read it. My brows furrowed in confusion a couple of times, and I glanced up at him. His face was completely devoid of any emotion. Once I reached the bottom of the page, I stared at him. "You can't be serious. None of this is true. It can't be." He held out a pen. "You're not particularly good at putting two and two together, are you, Mr. Ryan?" He smirked. I rubbed my head in my hands. Then I looked at the document again. Basically, I was signing a statement, admitting to killing the man I had killed, but also implicating Daniel. "What happens to me and Daniel?" I asked. The man licked his lips. "I'm your brief, Mr. Ryan. I will do my best to ensure that you receive the lowest sentence you can. Your co-conspirator, I will quite happily hang him out to dry if it reduces your sentence." I looked back down at the document. I didn't really have a choice. If I spilled my guts to the FBI, little Rosie would be hurt or killed. "What if I don't sign?" He raised his eyebrows. He didn't really have to answer. I knew already. "If it makes your decision any easier, Mr. Ryan, Daniel set you up to get his hands on your daughter. Vincent Marchese is no saint. You and I both know that. But he won't hurt her. Not unless she does something stupid," he added. I frowned. "Stupid, like what?" He rolled his eyes. "Like trying to run. He's not quite as forgiving as the FBI." I took the pen and scribbled my signature at the bottom. Then I pushed the document back across the table. "A wise decision, Mr. Ryan." He put the document back in his briefcase. "I'll be in touch. In the meantime, if you need anything..." He pushed a business card across the desk before briskly walking to the door and rapping on the glass with his knuckles. "Wait!" I yelled. "Can I see her, Rosie?" He shook his head. "It's better this way, for both of you." The door opened, and the guard ushered him out, then walked into the room. "Come on, Ryan, get a move on," he growled. I stood up, and he took me back to my cell. Best case scenario, I would end my days in here. Worst case, they'd land me with the death penalty. It didn't make me feel any easier that my fate was in the hands of a brief supplied by Vincent Marchesi. Worse than that, I'd agreed for my little Rosie to be looked after by the head of the Italian mafia. Vincent. Chapter 9. Beautiful. As I entered the bathroom, I walked over to the sink and set her down on the counter. Her little arms were still wrapped around my neck. "You can let go now, Gattina," I whispered. She slowly released her arms from around my neck. Her head dropped as she looked down at the floor. I put my forefinger under her chin and tilted it up. Her face was red. I doubted it was the after effect of the bad dream. More likely, she was embarrassed. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked. She shook her head. I put my hand on her thigh. She flinched a little but didn't complain when I gently rubbed my hand up and down. "Just stay here, Gattina, while I run the shower." She nodded. I walked over to the shower and turned on the water, allowing it to heat up. I walked back to the counter, where Rosie was still sitting. She looked at me, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. I cupped her face in my hand, gently caressing her cheek with the pad of my thumb. She was so beautiful, and she looked just like her mother, Amelia. My Amelia. Or at least she should have been mine. Daniel put paid to that. Amelia had been studying at the Conservatoria Bellini in Palermo. She was a very talented musician. She was beautiful, clever, and talented, and I was a fool. A fool for her and a fool for not telling her about the family. I loved her, but Daniel, he was obsessed with her. He would follow her, send her flowers. He would watch every performance that she gave. It was at this point that Daniel told our father that he wanted out. Father was furious. He almost had him killed. Mama always said I was his favorite, so when I begged him not to, he relented. But Daniel had to leave Sicily and never come back. Sometimes I wished that I had let Father kill him. I had been dating Amelia for a while. That was until Daniel told her about the family, who we were and what we did, that I would be the next Don. It should have been Daniel. He was older than me. That's what upset my father the most, I think. Amelia was horrified and broke it off with me immediately. Daniel expected her to fall into his arms. She didn't. Instead, she fell into the arms of Michael Ryan. I don't know what he was doing in Sicily, but he swept her off her feet. I don't even think he cared for her that much. She was probably supposed to be a quick fuck, but for some reason, she fell for him. When she became pregnant, he at least did the right thing. They were married, and they flew back to the States. I never saw her again. Daniel also flew out of our lives. He left Sicily and made a new life for himself. A life that involved Michael and Amelia. How do I know? I wanted to make sure she was safe. I kept an eye on her from afar, to make sure Michael did right by her. I failed in that attempt. The night she went into labor, Michael was out with his friends, drunk and high. If Amelia had made it to the hospital sooner, she would have survived, but she didn't. There was no one to take her. After that, I backed off. Amelia was gone. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have kept an eye on little Rosie. My brother's obsession shifted. It was only when Michael came on the family's radar that I had my people keep an eye on him. Even then, I didn't take much notice, not until Daniel popped up on the radar. Daniel had always been a sick fuck. I really believe the family had been lucky when he decided he wanted nothing to do with it. None of us were innocent, but Daniel was something else. Manipulative and dark. He would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. I was surprised he let Michael have Amelia. I turned my attention back to Rosie. My fingers grasped the hem of her t-shirt as I slowly pulled it up. She lifted her arms without me having to ask. When I had removed it, I discarded it on the floor. Her arms quickly folded across her chest and her face flushed. I couldn't help but smile. My fingertips gently glided across her shoulders and down her arms. I took her hands and placed them on my shoulders. I ran my fingers down the smooth velvet skin of her back. Her back arched, and she moaned. "Bellissima. Beautiful," I whispered, as my hands came to a stop on her waist. I gently lifted her from the counter, letting her stand on the marble tiles. My fingers dipped into the waistline of her shorts, pulling them down enough so they dropped in a pool at her ankles. I rested one of my hands on the firm cheek of her backside as I guided her toward the shower. As she stepped in, water cascaded over her shoulders. Rivulets of water dripped onto her tanned velvet skin. I quickly discarded my own clothing in a pile on the bathroom floor before stepping into the shower behind her. She gasped in surprise as one arm snaked around her waist, the other snaked around her collarbone, pulling her toward me. "Vincent!" she stuttered. I felt her body tense. I shushed her and pressed my lips to her neck. "Just relax, Gatina," I whispered. "Let me take care of you." I grabbed the body wash and squirted liberal amounts on her shoulders, gently massaging it into her body. I let my fingers trail over every inch of her skin, eliciting little moans from her every so often. "Does that feel good, Gatina?" I whispered, my breath fanning her neck. Her breath hitched in her throat. "I don't know," she stuttered. I gently turned her round to face me. "You don't know?" I mimicked. I raked my fingers through her dripping wet hair, then cupped her jaw in my hand. I dipped my head down and gently grabbed her bottom lip with my teeth. As she gasped, I let go and crashed my lips into hers, my tongue probing her open mouth, tasting her. She was divine, like nectar of the gods. She kissed me back, trying to mimic the movements of my mouth. Her first proper kiss, and I had claimed it. When our lips parted, she was gasping for breath. I turned off the shower, quickly wrapping a towel around me. I grabbed another, tightly wrapping it around her small frame, pinning her arms to her sides in the soft fabric. Then I scooped her up and carried her bridal style back into the bedroom. As I carried her, I claimed her lips once more. She didn't hesitate in kissing me back. I laid her on the bed and unwrapped the towel. Grabbing her wrists, I held them above her head. "What about now, Piccolo Gatina?" Her bright blue eyes widened, like a little deer caught in the headlights. "I thought so." I smirked as I claimed her lips once again. This time, though, I felt her struggle, trying to pull her hands free. I pulled away. "What's the matter, Gatina? I thought you liked being kissed," I questioned. I watched the expression on her face change. She frowned. "I do, but—" She hesitated. I raised my eyebrows in question. "But?" She closed her eyes, then opened them again, tears pooling. I was unsure whether they were real tears or forced. "I don't belong here, Vincent. I haven't even graduated from school yet. I want to go home." She sighed. I removed one of my hands, still pinning both wrists with one hand. I gently stroked her face. "I know you, Rosie Ryan." I smirked. "You wanted to drop out of school, but your father wouldn't let you, would he?" She suddenly looked surprised. "How do you—" She stopped mid-sentence. I could see her little mind working. Then she glared at me. "You've been spying on us, me and my dad." I chuckled. "Of course I have. How else would I know that your father was about to be arrested for murder?" Her indignation turned to shock. "Murder? No, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't hurt anyone. He just stole stuff," she cried. I leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "There are a lot of things you don't know about your father, Tesoro. For instance, he has agreed that you should stay with me." She shook her head vigorously. "No, he wouldn't. He wanted me to stay with Uncle Daniel. Daniel." The mere mention of his name soured my mood. I let go of her wrists. "There are clothes that will fit you in the closet. Find something to wear. We're going out for dinner," I snapped. I quickly stood up and walked back into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me.
Rosie. Chapter 10. Dinner. I stared at the closed door that Vincent had just slammed shut. Why was he so angry? What did he expect? For me to just lay back and open my legs? I shouldn't even be here. He'd kidnapped me, and now he was seducing me. I was so naive. He'd probably just take my virginity, then kill me. I didn't believe for 1 minute that my father wanted him to look after me. Why would he? Then I had a light bulb moment. He's taking me out to dinner. Did he mean out? I could escape, or at least try. This place must have an American consulate. All foreign countries did. I could find it and tell them exactly what had happened. At least if I were turned over to the FBI, I wouldn't be killed. I quickly jumped off the bed. Grabbing the towel, I vigorously rubbed my hair so it was only damp and not dripping wet. Then I headed over to the walk-in closet. As I walked in, I saw a light switch on the wall, so I flicked it. A fluorescent light flickered, then bathed the room in white light. I gasped. There were rails of clothes everywhere. On the left-hand side were suits and shirts, obviously Vincent's clothes. On the right, there were rails full of dresses. So many different styles and colors. No jeans, though, which disappointed me. I had always been a jeans and t-shirt sort of a girl. I never really felt comfortable in dresses. There were also 2 large chests of drawers, one at each end, and in the middle was a dressing table with a vanity mirror. I opened one of the drawers in the chest next to the dresses. It was filled with underwear, or I should say lingerie. I picked up a red lace and silk thong. I blushed, just at the thought of wearing it. I'd never worn anything like this before. Looking through the drawer, it was all pretty similar in varying colors. I shrugged and put it on. It was so soft. Then I looked at the dresses. I grabbed a red dress. It was a skater style with spaghetti straps that crossed over at the back, leaving my back mostly bare. I couldn't wear a bra with it, so I just quickly put it on. I wasn't very big up top anyway, so I could carry it off. Then I looked at the shoes. I grabbed a pair of red ballet pumps. I was relieved that they weren't all heels. Then I realized there were no heels. Well, no higher than about an inch. I shrugged my shoulders and flipped off the light. When I walked back into the bedroom, Vincent stood there in a pair of dark jeans and a white button-up shirt. The sleeves were rolled up, and I noticed a tattoo on his arm. Even when dressed casually, he looked hot. I shook the thought out of my mind. He stared at me, his anger now all but gone. "You look beautiful, Gatina," he cooed. I felt my face flush. I just hoped it wasn't as red as the lace thong I was wearing. "I didn't have time to do my hair," I quickly countered. Vincent smiled and beckoned me toward him with his finger. I walked forward, not wanting to anger him again. The last time he had been properly angry had been on the terrace. Then he had pointed a gun at me. Besides, I wanted him to trust me. That way, when I ran, he wouldn't be expecting it. I watched as he picked up a hairbrush from the console table that stood flush against one of the walls. As I neared him, his hand rested on the small of my back. It sent tingles through my body. How does he make me feel like this? I should hate him. I did hate him. My body was betraying me, and I had no control over it. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself and my rapidly beating heart. Vincent sat down on the bed and patted the space between his legs. I quickly sat down, just as I had when he had brushed my hair before. He slowly started brushing my hair. When he was done, he swept it over one shoulder, leaving the other shoulder and my neck bare. I felt his finger glide down the bare skin of my neck, then down to my shoulder. Goosebumps formed as he continued down my arm.
Such a good girl. You understand it will be better for you when you learn to obey me, don't you?
He whispered, his breath fanning my neck. "Yes, Vincent," I replied, my voice trembling. There was a hint of threat, a hint of menace in his voice. Then I felt his lips on my neck, peppering kisses on it, then on my bare shoulder. I clenched my legs together, trying to stop the feeling that was building there. "Now, Gatina," Vincent began, "I have a gift for you." Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a little box. Inside was a silver necklace, a single diamond in a silver setting hung from the chain. He carefully put it on, sliding his hand under my hair to free it from the confines of the chain. "Do you like it?" he whispered. I nodded. "It's beautiful. Thank you." He ran his fingers across my shoulders and down my arms. When they came to a stop, he gently gripped my upper arms. "Good girls get rewards. Bad girls, well, you don't want to know about bad girls, Gatina," he whispered. "Now, let's go to dinner." He gently eased me into a standing position. Then his hand once again rested on my bare back as he ushered me toward the bedroom door. I was beginning to think that wearing this dress had been a bad idea. We walked down the main staircase. As usual, the main entrance was littered with men. This time we headed toward the main entrance. 2 large double doors. Sitting out front was a black sports car, a 2-seater. On closer inspection, I realized it was a Ferrari Spider. Not that I'd ever even seen one before, but the boys at school were always raving about them. Imagine how jealous they would be if they knew I was about to ride in one. Vincent opened the passenger door, and I got in. The seats were leather, of course they were. Vincent had to be filthy rich, and he had to let everyone know. As I sat in the car, I had my first look at the outside of the villa. It was huge, and it was also gorgeous. The walls were plain white stucco, and the roof was made of red tiles. Glancing around, I saw that the grounds were also huge, surrounded by 6-foot walls, topped with another 2 feet of wrought iron trellis. 2 huge wrought iron gates completed the entryway. More men were dotted around the perimeter and next to the gates. There would be no chance of escaping from here. My only option was to attempt it once we were outside. Tonight might be my only opportunity. Vincent got in the car and the engine roared to life. He headed toward the huge gates, and as we approached, they opened. My eyes widened in surprise. Vincent chuckled. "I have sensors on all my vehicles. The gates open automatically when they recognize the sensor." I frowned as the car accelerated through the open gates. "What about visitors?" I asked curiously. "Visitors are only ever allowed on the property if they are escorted. They always come in one of my cars. Anyone else isn't welcome." I really had no idea where we were. Vincent's home seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. He drove fast, a little too fast for my liking, but after a short drive, we entered a more built-up area, then a town. The streets were narrow, and I was thankful for that because he slowed down. Eventually, we came to a stop in a narrow street next to a small bistro-type restaurant. Once he was out of the car, he opened the passenger door so that I could get out. I'll give him that. He seemed to be a gentleman. We entered the restaurant and were greeted by an older man. He bowed his head. "Signor Marchesi, onori il mio ristorante con la tua presenza." "Mr. Marchesi, you honor my restaurant with your presence." Vincent nodded in acknowledgement. "Grazie, Luigi, ma per favore, inglese oggi il mio compagno non parla italiano." "Thank you, Luigi, but please, English today. My companion doesn't speak Italian." Luigi nodded. I guessed he was the owner. "Of course, Signor Marchesi. Let me show you to your table." Luigi led us to a table in the corner, slightly out of the way. I guessed perhaps that Vincent came here regularly. Perhaps he didn't want to be the center of attention. Once again, Vincent rested his hand on my back as we followed Luigi. Luigi pulled out a chair, and Vincent ushered me to sit. Then Luigi did the same for Vincent. He then clapped his hands, and a young girl came across with menus. She looked absolutely terrified. Did Vincent really have all these people under his control? As soon as she had handed us the menus, she darted off. I glanced down at the menu. It was all in Italian. Great, now I couldn't even ask for what I wanted. Vincent glanced over at me and smirked. He knew full well I didn't understand a word of what it said. "Would you like me to order for you?" he asked smugly. I nodded. "Yes, please." I wasn't about to give him a smart-arse remark, although I longed to. He reached across the table and took my hand, rubbing his thumb gently across the top. "You'll have to tell me what you like, Gattina." Damn this man. Why did everything have to be some sort of innuendo? Or was it just me reading too much into what he said? I took a deep breath. "Anything, really?" I smiled. "Surprise me." Vincent looked at me and licked his lips.
"Oh, I can definitely surprise you, Tesoro."
He let go of my hand and snapped his fingers. The girl who had given us the menus earlier was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a young man walked over. "Are you ready to order, signor?" Vincent frowned, then nodded. "2 pappardelle alla natra and a bottle of Chianti," he demanded. The young man nodded and scooted off. "I'm not sure I should be drinking alcohol," I stated. Vincent chuckled. "Then let them arrest me." I wasn't sure whether his intent was to get me tipsy. I'd never had wine before, and I have to say I quite liked it. After one glass, however, I began to feel a little lightheaded. I also felt a bit guilty. Here was Vincent, wining and dining me, being a gentleman, and I was planning my escape. I couldn't let myself forget that I was a hostage, though. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed his company, but I was nothing more than a prisoner. He could kill me on a whim if he were so inclined. After the meal was finished, I decided to make my move. "Vincent," I began, "is there a restroom I could use?" He smiled. "Of course, tesoro." He snapped his fingers and Luigi walked over.
Was everything satisfactory, Signor Marchesi? Luigi asked nervously.
Vincent smiled.
Yes, Luigi, perfect as always. Now, could you show my companion to the ladies' restroom? Luigi nodded. Of course, this way, Signorina.
I followed Luigi, casting one last glance at Vincent. He seemed oblivious to my plan. Maybe he thought it would be crazy of me to try to escape. With no money or identity documents, it probably was. But I had to try. I had to try to make it back to America somehow. There must be an American embassy somewhere here. Somewhere that wasn't owned and controlled by Vincent Marchesi. Once inside the restroom, I quickly looked around. I didn't have much time, probably only a few minutes before Vincent became suspicious. I almost cheered when I saw the window, big enough for me to climb through. It was even open slightly. For a split second, I panicked. This was too easy. I brushed the paranoia away and climbed onto the window ledge. Pushing the window open, I dropped down onto the sidewalk outside. I couldn't see Vincent's car, so I guessed the street I was on was at the back of the restaurant. I quickly headed down the road, walking fast so I didn't look too conspicuous. At last, I was free. Now all I had to do was work out where I was and where the nearest U.S. embassy was.